Okay, I think we'll start. Morning, everyone. Welcome to term 3. I've had a few apologies for today. There's stuff going around. People are, oh well, whatever. But the show goes on, so let's get into it. I hope everyone had a good break. Had a great trip, thank God. Very inspiring, very amazing. So we're back into it. Just wanted to map out the terms. So we're doing something a bit different this time. I'm not doing one long series. I'm going to do a few different things. So this series is going to be for 4 weeks. But I just want to, it was on all the flyers and the thing, but just to point out that on the 8th of August, we're not having a class. That's a Thursday. We'll take a break that week because I'll be away. We did this last year also. I remember the Rabbi G doing a retreat for 2 days. It happens to be over a Thursday. So in other words, we'll have 4 sessions, but it'll be over 4 weeks. 8th of August, we don't have a session. On the 29th of August, which is the end of the series, I'm doing a one-off thing. I don't know if you remember a while ago I spoke about trauma. I mentioned a woman who had wrote a book that isn't, I forgot what the book is called now. Her name is Devori Kryman. She's an amazing, amazing person. Went through unimaginable tragedy in life, and yet in a very real way, went through a very, very long process of healing and faith and tachon and so on, and asked her to speak. So she's going to speak set up over Zoom and stuff, but there'll be a guest that week. But there'll be also a one-off thing that I'm doing, and then we'll have a 3-week series towards the end of the term called Changing Our Habits. It's all on the emails that I've sent out and so on, but I just wanted to put it out. So this will be going for a few weeks, and then we'll do the other things. Okay. So at a time, the topic of today's thing is called advanced or stuck, challenging some of the thinking of today's society. So I wanted to spend first a bit of time on the foundation of this discussion and also what sparked it, why I decided to do this. So it was sparked by a recently published book called Bad Therapy by Abigail Shrier. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's this book. Bad Therapy. Oh, sorry, Bad Therapy by Abigail Shrier. I don't know if you've heard of it. Abigail Shrier, yeah, she's an author also of a book that was written about called Irreversible Damage. She's a very, very well researched journalist actually, but very, very thorough and very well researched. I'm not going to go through the whole book. Take different parts of it, but essentially what she does is she challenges some of the fundamental thinking around the current fundamental thinking around trauma, emotional health, therapies, especially in children, and so on. Now I read the book, and actually I was really happy because it's good to challenge some of the thinking that we're going through. It's not always so great, and she challenges some important things. We'll see about the trends of thinking in our society. Similar to books that I've mentioned before, like we once did a series on the book Narcissism Epidemic, you'll remember, by Gene Twenge and Keith Campbell. There's a book called The End of Trauma by George Benanon. Also, he talks about resilience, and he says people aren't talking about resilience enough, and that kind of thing. But, as we'll see later, I'm going to say this, but I'll explain it later and throughout the series. But to be honest, the book also runs a risk. In other words, I'm really happy that it's pushed back on some of the thinking, but it does run a risk of doing the very same thing in the opposite extreme, similar to the thing that you actually challenge. What I mean by that is, because what happens often is you challenge something, and because you challenge it, you go to the other extreme, and you end up also with bad thinking. You go to extreme thinking, right? I'm not saying she does that, she claims to be balanced, but one could read the book and misinterpret it, and then sort of share theories or share the ideas that are actually also not very effective and not very productive. But I'll explain as I go on, we'll see in a second. So, and it's important to make that clear, because when reading this book, if you ever get your hands on it, and or listening to this, it's important not to get the wrong idea. We need to understand the proper balance and the proper approach. So, let me give an introduction about societal trends and societal thinking. And that is like this. The way people think about things, and things that are ideas, right? Ideas that are espoused and taught and shared and so on, they're very easy to happen. Like all of a sudden we can have all sorts of new ideas of thinking. That comes from a different concepts. So first of all, we have this idea like herd mentality. You know, someone teaches something, someone raises awareness of something. It's not properly researched. I mean, you see this in the media now, all about Israel, for example, right? The most ridiculous things, the most ridiculous falsehoods can happen. People start to believe them, and they don't even know. And they don't even know what they're saying, they don't even know what they're thinking, they don't even know what they're believing in. They just start believing it, right? And it's very contagious, particularly now with the power of media, social media, government even. Where I was very affected by this, not personally affected, I'm saying, but like us, was a turning point in my thinking. I'm a trusting guy normally, or used to be anyways. And it really was damaged around COVID, I have to say, where there was so many things that we just started believing. Some were good, some were terrible. And people just took it on. We just took it on because that's where we are. We just got brainwashed. Now there's all sorts of royal commissions around the world on how countries handled COVID and all that kind of stuff, and it's just interesting because and people took it on in the most extreme ways. I mean, one of the things that I always laugh at is when I go in the streets, still today, and I see people wearing masks alone driving in a car. I mean, you got to be kidding! Like, what are you? Like, who are you going to make sick, and who are you going to get sick from driving in a car with your windows closed, right? But this is what happens. People start thinking and it becomes a thing, and right? And it's a dangerous thing. So it's true also in the area of mental health, and as we'll soon see, it's true in the area of intervention, and it can be true in many, many, many different areas. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, and we've talked about this before, but it's important to highlight, is the issue around what's moral and what's ethical and what's correct, right? So there's this distinction between what we call absolute morality and relative morality. What I mean, because Rabbi Sachs talks about this a lot. Society, every society, in every generation, creates a set of norms, ethics, morals that very often are subjective, and they suit the thinking and the interest and the short-term gain of that particular society, right? So things that, there were times in history where there was horrible things going on, and people believed it because that suited them. Not that we're doing something. Sometimes we overindulge in chocolate cake and we know we shouldn't. Okay, fine. But then there's sometimes where society does things when they actually really believe, and they believe that it's moral, that it's ethical, because that's what relative morality is, right? Now, in Jewish thinking, of course, it doesn't work like that. In Jewish thinking, we understand that a society cannot create its own morality, because you're the one creating things that are the moral way to live when they are influenced and directed by your own bias and your own self-interest and your own perceptions, right? And therefore we believe, of course, that we need a higher source of outside the society, something that transcends people keeping to those moral values, to look at it from the outside and to actually inspire us and direct us in a system which we call absolute morality, which is the Torah, right? So God is transcendent, of course, God who gave us the Torah and provided us with a long set of morals and ethics and things like that. And the definition of morality and the definition of what is moral and what it isn't, what is wrong, what is right, and so on. And that's the only way you can, and that's why they're eternal. Of course, now they have to be implemented in each society according to the context of that society, of that generation. But essentially, they are timeless values. They are timeless things which are eternal because they don't come from ancient society. They come from a transcendent source, which transcends time as well. And a source from the outside of the system, giving into the system of how we should be. That's the important thing to And also in this discussion we're going to have, this comes in as well because there are certain fundamentals that when we create awareness about the topics and we discuss new things and new interventions and new diseases or whatever the case is, we always have to match them up with these timeless values and the timeless moral ideas so that we live according to them and implement them within the context of these discoveries, which is always done, of course. We'll see a little bit towards the end of today as well. And the third idea is an issue which we have mentioned many times, and that is the pendulum idea. You know, in last series, we did the emotional powers of the soul. Of course, one discussion, one Thursday morning, we dedicated to the concept of tiferet, you remember, which is between chesed and gvura, right? And we explained that what is tiferet is this deep-rooted ability that we have to combine two opposites, right? To combine chesed and gvura, for those who remember the discussion. And it's only possible to do that, right? Even with our emotions, it's impossible to do that. It's hard to do that because we all have an emotional structure, we all have our biases, we all have our emotional responses, and therefore normally we respond by what we are, right? Tiferet allows us to transcend that, yeah, and to combine two things together because we're looking at the truth. We're looking at not what we are or what we're feeling, but we're looking at what is necessary, what needs to happen, right? So we talked a lot about that, about the idea of chesed and gevura, and sometimes just we have to combine, like with parenting, for example, a child sometimes we need to show gevura, but love at the same time. The good of the child. Not what we're thinking, we want to respond really badly. Someone screams at us, we might want to scream back, or we might want to overspoil someone, but that's not what is needed. It's what we're feeling, it's our nature, it's our personality we have within us, very deep, beyond the ego, something that transcends our own ego and our own self-interest, to combine chesed and gevura, right? Now, society doesn't do this very well. That's the general rule. Which is why, if you look throughout history, things are pendulums. They swing from one extreme to another, and then we fight them, go back, and then go back to the opposite extreme, and none of that is very good, right? This is very, very prevalent in education, of course, where we used to have a very, very strict society and corporal punishment, all this kind of stuff, and very, very heavy discipline, because that was the culture at the time. Society decided it wasn't very good, so they went to the extreme. And we ended up with a complete mess. I don't believe in hitting kids, but structure, discipline is a very, very important thing if you strike the right balance. But society doesn't do it very well. And in many, many issues, we see this in politics today, people cannot be nuanced, and they cannot combine things, and they cannot see things in a nuanced, balanced way, and combine opposites. For example, war. Let's say war. War moral, war not moral. War is bad. Sometimes it's good, but people have a hard time with that, right? We did a shiur once on the morality of war, right? So the same sort of thing. Even I'll take an example, right? Like you have in America, the big debate, the political arena, which is, of course, currently extremely entertaining, and would be very funny if it wasn't true. But you have the debate around the whole idea of choice and abortion, right? That's interesting. The pro-lifers are extreme. The choices are extreme. Look into for example, the Jewish view is actually not so simple. It's very, very nuanced. The abortion, but it depends when. There are times when it's permitted, times when it's necessary. It's not about if your body belongs to you. It doesn't belong to you. It's not about a fetus. Actually, it's not exactly the same thing as a human being. It's a very, very complex, nuanced topic, right? But it's a nuanced topic because it takes into account different opposites and different things, and therefore comes up with a very different outcome. But society has a very hard time doing that. People like to stick one thing, stick it in an extreme. Right? So that's a very, very important thing to understand. That's what I said before also about this book. This book challenges some of the norms of society today, but one has to be careful not to go to the other extreme, because some of what is challenging is actually good. So you need to be able to put it into perspective. Am I making sense? Are we good so far? Yeah. Okay. Let's go into an example today. We're going to give a couple of examples from the book over the next few weeks about different things that are challenged. But we're going to talk about today a general area to do with mental health. Right? Mental health is a very important topic. Now, again, I want to clarify. I'm going to do this many times throughout the series because I don't want to be misinterpreted. So, the clarification is that the awareness that has happened in the world of mental health in the last number of decades, or the last century, is excellent. It's very, very good. And it's done tremendous good, right? It's taken away the stigma. It's introduced amazing therapies for different areas of mental health crises. And just the high level of awareness makes people able to talk about it and to understand what's going on a lot of the time. They've got with tremendous and sometimes great interventions, sometimes medical interventions. All that has been overall very, very beneficial for society, right? But, and that needs to be understood. However, it's also important to highlight, and I think that's what she's doing in the book, and I think correctly so, the price that society will pay sometimes for that awareness. Now, highlighting the price we pay for it is not just to say, well, there's a price to pay. It's to try and make sure that we avoid that price to pay as much as we possibly can, right? Because it turns out that what has happened, and we're going to go into more detail and unpack it a bit, but it turns out that what has happened is over-pathologizing. There's no question that that's happening a lot, and we'll talk about that. Over-diagnosing. Treatments and some interventions which are actually not helpful, they're actually destructive, and so on and so forth, right? One of the great analogies to understand with this is like physical health. Not everything good is good for everyone. A simple, very basic example would be that if a healthy person who's not sick physically, doesn't have any infection, takes antibiotics over an extended period of time, it's just not healthy, it's good for you. And in fact could have bad side effects, right? That doesn't mean antibiotics is bad. It means when you need them, they're good, right? And we'll talk about that a bit more later. Later on in the book, she gives an example, a more extreme example of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a fantastic invention. And it has sent a large number of people into remission, right? It comes with great risks, and it comes with great potential damage. So a healthy person that goes to chemotherapy is a real problem. You wouldn't do such a thing, right? So that's the concept which we're going to sort of unpack a little bit. So let's unpack this a little bit. I wanted to start by just bringing an interesting little story, which is actually not on the topic, but it highlights one point. In 1960, several students in America and educators from the Hillel organization, that works on campuses, Jewish organization, they came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to have a talk. It was very early on in the 1960s, where at that time he was taking private audiences. One could sort of ask questions and be more relaxed. And this group of students and teachers asked a lot of questions of the Rebbe. And one of them was, one student said, he said to the Rebbe, I observe from your library that you're well read. So I want to ask you, must be addressed how Judaism aligns with philosophy and science when teaching to today's erudite college students. So the Rebbe answered something. I'm not going to apply it exactly and go on and how he applied it to the question. I want to it's an interesting little story he tells. He said to the Hillel director, he said, I'll give you an example from a professor that I knew. He responded. He was a professor of medicine, and at one point he was immersed in studying the anatomy of the leg. He delved into research to understand the function of all the muscles and how they perfectly coordinate when a person walks. However, he later told me, said the Rebbe, when he was engrossed in the details of walking, he found that actually walking became very difficult for him. Right? With every step he took, his mind would analyze the workings of each muscle and joint, complicating his natural flow of walking. Right? You'll see later where that comes into play, because sometimes when we overemphasize things, we overfocus things, it actually cause more problems than good. Okay. So, in the beginning of the book, she highlights a term, a concept. I have to be honest, I didn't know the term before the book, so I hope I'm going to pronounce this properly. The thing called heterogenesis. Do you want to know what it is? Heterogenesis means, it comes from some sort of Greek word, originating with the healer. And it's a term used also for physical health. Right? That sometimes a person goes for healing, and the healing process makes the problem worse and not better. Right? In other words, the process of healing, and a well-meaning healing, but it becomes better, it becomes worse, not better. Right? So, for example, a patient goes into have a kidney now. In the physical sense, it could come from from mistakes. For example, apparently it's not so uncommon where, I know now they've gotten very good at this because they're really careful, but I remember when I once had a little thing on my knee for a meniscus. It drew on the right knee and they make sure 100 times that it's the right knee. Because apparently it does happen in operations that you do the wrong knee, right? It's a problem. And then you just land up with a sore and you're probably not fixed. And this even happened in things like kidneys, right? Or for example, a person go into, there can be side effects. A person can be into anesthesia, for example, that people weren't aware before and so on and so forth, right? So it is, this concept of iatrogenesis is actually true of everything, right? Because interventions, generally, all interventions that are not sort of the normal course of living, carry risks. That's what it is, right? Everything carries risks. In halakha, for example, in Jewish law, there's lots of, you can present it by a person, for example, presented by a doctor about a certain intervention they could do, a certain operation they could do, which can run a very, very heavy risk of maybe even death. Like I've heard this, like I've heard Shrier in medical ethics. He's very good at it. Abigail has amazing talks on YouTube about medical ethics in Jewish law. He talks about actual questions that have come up, like, says to an older person, if you don't have this generation, your life's going to be over in 3 months. If you do have it, it's possible you die on the table, but then for 2 years, right? So what's the toss-up? We often do that in medical interventions, right? And really what it boils down to is how you compare risks with the benefits, right? What it comes down to. And that's something every person has to do. Now, you do two things, right? You do two things. First of all, you compare the risks with the benefits. So, for example, you don't go for X-ray unless you have to, right? You don't hang around the emergency room with all the Germans there to say hello to someone unless you have to, right? That's the way it works, right? So you don't do things unless you have to. But even when you have to, for example, you have to. I mean, I'm not myself. Thank God, I haven't taken antibiotics in the last number of years. But when I take antibiotics for having an infection or throat infection, the case is, I develop like a thrush. It's very, very bad for me. My mouth is terrible. So when I spoke to a doctor about it a number of years ago, and when he gives me an antibiotic, he gives me also probiotics, so that sort of hopefully mitigates that, right? So we don't do interventions for no reason, and even if we do them, because there is a reason, obviously when you take antibiotics for a reason, the benefit outweighs the risks. There might be side effects, but you get rid of the infection, which is an important thing to do. But at the same time, you also need to do what is going to support minimizing at least the risks that will happen to that, right? So all that is so simple and so obvious in medical health, but it's not so obvious sometimes in mental health, right? And this is her point. Just like you wouldn't go to a therapy unless you had to, unless you understood that it was necessary, you don't send a child particularly to therapy unless they actually need it, right? Now this is a big problem today because there are a lot of young people, children, who are going for mental health therapy or don't need it and actually can do damage. This is the point of the book, really. That's why it's called bad therapy. Right? So in physical health, everyone understands this is a very simple concept, but in mental health, not always, right? Now, because what we're going to see later, sometimes every sort of ongoing mental health intervention, it can be highlighting things that aren't there and actually can make a person mentally less stable and mentally less unwell than actually they went into therapy for, right? Because what we're going to see later, and this is part of the problem that we're experiencing, and I've seen it a lot, right, is that not everything is a mental health crisis. Not everything is a mental health problem. And that's why this overdiagnosing and overpathologizing, which is happening particularly in children, is becoming a real problem because every intervention has risks. So when you actually don't have a crisis and you use intervention for that risk, for that crisis, it could be damaging. We'll see as we go along how that is. Right? Now, this is particularly true, as I said, it's true with adults as well. But it's particularly true with children. All right? In the introduction to the book, she tells a very shocking story about her own child. Maybe it's not happening as much here in Australia, but in America. Her child, I think, was a very, very young child, under 10, I think. and had a bit of a rough time in camp. American summer camps are a very, very big thing. Went away for another week. They got a stomach problem. They came back. They were well. So she took him to a doctor. You normally do if you have a stomach problem, right? And the doctor looked at him, and then the doctor says, "Sorry, I just need to do a mental health screen," and asked the mother to go out of the room. She was a bit more clueless than that, so she refused to go out of the room. So he did it. She started in the room, and started asking the screen, asking questions. This is. Let me just have a look. I'll tell you. I don't have it in front of me. I'll tell you how old the child was. What is it? I've heard her talk about it on a podcast. A very young child. And the screening went like this. In the past few weeks, have you wished you were dead? Number 2, in the past few weeks, have you felt that you or your family would be better off if you were dead? Number 3, in the past, this is a true story. It's like in the past week, have you been having thoughts about killing yourself? Have you ever tried to kill yourself? Yes, when, how? Are you having thoughts of doing it now, right? Now, obviously, where it's coming from is because there's been a huge awareness of suicide prevention, which is a very good thing. Is becoming more comfortable to talk about it, sweeping under the carpet, and so on and so forth, which is fantastic when the tendencies of what's needed. Take a child who's 10, who's doing great life after a bit of a stomachache in camp, to do that is absolutely tempting. You're planting thoughts, you're planting experiences, but that is what is happening. That's, a bit extreme, maybe it's happening all over the place, but it is happening. It turns out that even talking through your problems, even highlighting problems isn't always helpful, right? As we'll see later, there are things which we can let go of, and that's fine, and we can let go of it. And sometimes the very therapy process, and I keep on saying I'm not against therapy, God forbid, and it is very good by therapists, everything else, but sometimes a person, especially a young child, in therapy when they don't need to be, it actually can create the problem rather than the healing. And there is research on this, right? There is research that kids particularly, talking it out through and highlighting mental health issues, actually begin to see themselves and define themselves as being, and it's not always like that. And other things happen which need to happen, but sometimes don't need to happen. For example, they can sometimes therapy can encourage family and estrangement. This happens a lot, where you go for a problem and then the therapist confirms that it's your mother's fault, your aunt's fault, or your sister's fault, whatever the case is. So encourage you to break off all ties. Sometimes it can destroy marriages. All these things are possible side effects, and when you go into it when you don't need to go into it, it creates more problems, right? Now, this is actually true even with adults. We'll develop this soon a little bit. And again, if someone needs to, but these possible problems, therefore we have to be aware. Now, about an interesting story. There's a psychiatrist called Samantha Boardman. She told a story about a patient that she had who quit therapy after a number of weeks. And asked why, she said, all we do is talk about the real bad stuff in our life, right? I sit in your office and complain for 45 minutes straight. Even if I'm having a good day, coming here makes me think about all the negative things, right? So I'll try that because she writes about the therapy that she had. She's reading that. I remember saving up all my emotional injuries to report to my therapist, who should have something to talk about in the session. Inquiries that I might just have to let go of, right? Now, let's understand this a little bit and to clarify what I've been saying. We know that there are lots of things that we need to process, and there are lots of things in the human experience that we actually have the ability and the healthy thing to just let go of. Right? So I've talked about this in the past in the context of an interesting phrase in Torah. Torah talks about not hating someone else. So I said, hate your friend in your heart. So that's a phrase where this idea that harboring in your heart is very, very unhelpful, damaging for a person. Carrying around hate. Right? So what is the solution about not carrying out hate? So there are two solutions. We have to make a choice about which one is necessary. Right? Today is one where it talks about King Solomon says that if you have anxiety, if you have worry, or if you have issues in your heart, you just talk them out. And in fact, the Code of Jewish Law says if something hurts you, get rid of it. You must not transgress what it says in the verse. Don't carry around hate in your heart. But you must go talk to the person, have a difficult conversation, get it out, process it. Right? That's true. That has to happen. Because there's another way that you don't carry around hate in your heart. Just let go. Just let go. Now, why am I saying that? Because we all go through, things that are minor, that are sometimes trivial or not so trivial. Maybe they're more trivial. We can work through it. Yes, the goal is not to carry around in your heart, but we can get over it. Right? What's happening now is that we are creating a very fragile generation where everything is becoming a problem. An extreme example, and I'm not political and I'm not giving a comment on politics, but now Trump is a big thing in America. But the first time he won, back in 2016, right, they were reporting on college campuses. People were sending out to their students emails that if you need mental health support, they were creating safe rooms where people go and express their emotions. Get over it. The two candidates, each one has a big following. You don't like it, just get over it. You put them out the next time. Right? It's not something you need therapy. That's what's going on. It's a real thing. We're talking about mental health issues, right? Emotional issues. Right? Because this can happen. We turn everything into a problem, and everything is a problem. Right? And now, sometimes it's hard to decide. You need to decide what it is. You need to talk to a friend to work out something I can just let go of, but something that's really. Sometimes people have a relationship issue which is really severe. Sometimes people go through experiences where they can be really hurt, or sometimes really traumatized, sometimes really affected. And it's not something you can just let go of, and then it's not good to not talk about it. Of course, then you need to talk about it. And talking about it needs to be in a good setting, in a healthy setting, in a setting where it'll be healthy to express and process what you're feeling and the emotions that you're going through. What you don't need to do that. It will be easy just to let it go, just to talk to yourself and understand that everything happens for a reason. Maybe the person didn't mean it. And it's not the end of the world, just a different view and all that kind of stuff. Then you don't need to run to a therapist, right? Because there is an issue, right? I'll just tell you, like one of the side effects of mental health awareness, one of the side effects of therapy, there can be side effects. Now, we can make sure it doesn't happen. But there are side effects, sometimes absolutely critical, and it must happen many, many times. But it puts a very big focus on the person's weakness. And they can what kind of therapy it is, what the focus is, and so on. But a lot of talk therapy, psychotherapy, and things like that, often what it leads to is that people develop a sort of a victimhood syndrome, right? Because they're expressing and re-emphasizing and repeating all the weaknesses that they have and the people that cause those weaknesses and so on and so forth. So they become fragile. That fragility leads to a bit of a self-absorption or a bit of a sort of a victimhood mentality, right? Or if it's not victimhood, it can lead to a very big focus on self. Anytime we focus on self, there's always a danger, even if we focus on self in a good way. In Jewish thought, for example, once a year, we have what's called Elul, right? And Elul, we focus on ourselves. We focus on making a cheshbon. We reflect and we take stock of weaknesses. But we are something that's very good to do, but you can't do it all year round. You do it once a day for a few minutes. But it's not something you should keep doing. Why? One of the reasons is because at the end of the day, as critical as taking stock is and reflecting and growing from that reflecting, but if you keep doing it, all you're doing is you're thinking about you. You in a continuous way, it's not a good idea. Right? It's just not a good idea. One of the greatnesses of people who get on with life and accomplish, right, they don't take themselves too seriously. We obviously we have to have a good, healthy self-esteem, and we have to have self-perception, and we have to feel healthy, and so on and so forth. But the obsession with self is a big problem. I'll give you an example. Using the Atlantic body, the parallel would be this. And I've discussed it with people as well, and sometimes, for example, when there's addiction is a term, addiction or addiction, it needs to be a strong healing process. And that process, for example, is ongoing meetings, AA meetings, 12-step meetings. Yeah? By the way, is one of the greatest things that was ever developed. Right? No question. But it can have a side effect. And what side effect is that when people go continuously to 12-step meetings, for example, and in good therapy, which is absolutely critical. Okay, that's not a question. It's the root of his addiction, which leads to a terrible life and a dysfunctional life, and paralysis and everything else. But there is sometimes a side effect, and the world's not perfect. People who do that tend to become very self-absorbed because they're always going to meetings, always talking about themselves, and you can with a lot of thinking about yourself, even in a good way, positive thinking, you can actually develop a self-absorption, right? So that's an example of something where you have to go, you have to do it, you have to take the antibiotic, but it has a side effect, or could have a side effect, not for everyone, but definitely can have that side effect. You know the side effect put into place. I'm not going to not go. I'm going to go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go through this process. I'm going to heal, but I'm going to try and learn stuff or have someone talk to me about getting caught up, not getting trapped in myself in a very, very self-absorbed way. I listened to a podcast recently. I had a lot of childhood stuff and trauma, etc. And I've gone through a very healing process. It was interesting. Our topic today is about psychedelics, and which has become very popular in America. Okay. But maybe it works in some cases. This person had become so going through a healing process. And then what became very, very evident throughout the podcast was over obsession. She's going for breath work. She's necessary, but maybe it was really very, very deep focus, which often is very unhealthy, right? So, what's the point? What are we saying so far? What's the, especially with children, not everything has to become an issue, and when it becomes an issue, it's a problem. We create more problems than we heal, right? Unless it's necessary. Now, again, if it's necessary, it's necessary, and then even then, we need to know what are the side effects, who are the people who want to do more damage than good, and how do we mitigate the side effects, possible side effects, as much as we possibly can, right? Now, she talks about because this is becoming a thing as well, right? In younger people, in high schools, for example, and teenagers, especially girls apparently, where it's become a thing. It used to be, we took away the mental awareness, we took away stigma, right? Which is a good thing. So people are more ready to get help, more ready to go talk, and so on and so forth. We also now gone to a place where everything is a problem. Teenage, especially teenage girl, but even teenage boys, it's like cool to have therapists. In fact, it's almost embarrassing not to have one. Right? This is becoming a big problem. Like everyone has to have a therapist, right? Like it's kind of a thing with kids in high school. Like, who's your therapist? It can be very good, but it can be very damaging. Now, to understand this is this, right? Just going back on the idea of differentiating what is a problem, what isn't a problem. So I want to go back to something I mentioned many, many times. Here's the following. We are all born with two souls, the animal soul and the godly soul, right? We've talked about this many times. The animal soul is what animalistic tendencies. That's not a sickness. That's called a healthy person, right? We all have problems. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. Weaknesses that we all have ego. We have weaknesses from the ego, weaknesses that come from our personality. We all have personality. Some people angry than others, some people indulge more than others. Some people, they get nervous, they get anxious. Some people suffer from jealousy. Whatever the case is, we all have an animal soul that has weaknesses, that comes with flaws, personality problems, which the purpose of us being created is to work on it. And we're supposed to become a better person, we're supposed to be refined, we're supposed to work on it, we're supposed to people, we're supposed to take responsibility. Weaknesses don't define us, as we've talked about many times. They don't define us, they are ours, but not us. In other words, they are ours to work with, we can work with them. People do fail, people make mistakes, that's the greatness of the human being. Learning from flaws makes us stronger, more resilient, and we become better people. That is all part of a healthy human being, right? This is particularly true for kids. Why? We are taught capitalistically, when kids are born, the animal soul is very developed and the bodily soul is very underdeveloped. Okay, in fact, that's the way God made us. That's why kids are very egocentric. It's supposed to be that way, right? If you tell me about a selfless 4-year-old, I would say, 4-year-old's not supposed to be selfless. Because whatever reason, God made us that we grow up and we discover ourselves until we become adolescents. That's fine, right? Our job as parents, of course, or educators, is to teach good things, teach humility, teach selflessness, and hopefully when they come to adulthood, they learn to make relationships. That's why 5-year-olds don't have relationships. Play, but they just talk at each other, they actually don't engage with each other much, right? And that's fine. But as they get older, we start to teach going out of yourself. We hopefully start to teach about, calming your ego down and becoming selfless and laying the foundations for healthy relationships. We start way into adolescence. Right? So you have kids that are naughty, you have kids that are good, you have kids a bit nervous, you have kids, all kinds of things, and they're all good. You have kids with all kinds of what they call Yiddish, all kinds of shagasim, right? And they're not weaknesses. They're just normal part of living. Right? Now what's happening is everything has a name and everything has a label. So misbehaving, so we call them very often we put them into the box of opposition defined behavior syndrome or something, right? Disorder. Common disorder. A shy kid, lots of shy kids around. So right? I don't know. Clumsy kids, they have a name for dyspraxia or something, right? I'll tell you another thing to rise. It's a good thing. Now again, our kids with social anxiety. There are kids with oppositional, what do you call it, behavior. That's true, ODD. Right? It's true. There are kids with that. Not every kid that's a vilchai, as I say, has oppositional disorders, right? Now, it's up to the parents to take responsibility for that. It's hard to say no. All that kind of stuff. We need to provide love and discipline together, structure and rules and boundaries so that they are to be healthy human beings. That is what the world is all about, right? So we start doing this thing where everything becomes a thing. So I'll tell you an interesting podcast I heard a while ago. There's a very the sort of recent great emphasis in mental health order, especially with children, is ASD, which is autistic spectrum disorder. I don't know if you know this, but they've got rid of the Asperger thing. There's one now, it can be severely autistic or very mild. Kids who they call today are neurodivergent, right? It means they're just differently and they are different. And there's many kids like that, and there's many adults like that as well. And it's a thing, and they've researched it, and there's therapies for it. The problem is, and this is again the same problem, where you start to do everything like that, right? So there's one guy who's very into this. Said, one of the things, if a kid has ASD, then you need to understand that not just misbehaving because they want to misbehave, but coming to give kind of interventions, which is true. The problem is we start doing like that. So I heard the podcast that I was talking about, he was very obsessed with it, and the pendulum is very extreme. And he says, you need to understand, to just think differently. So for a kid, for example, when a kid is rude, they're not rude, honest, right? They have this honesty about them because I don't know what he's talking about, but I had kids who were rude, and when they were rude, I took care of it. Right? Chutzpah is a bad thing. And there are many kids who are rude. There are many kids who are just plain rude. And you know what you have to do? You have to discipline them. Right? They don't need therapy. They don't need intervention. Now, when it's extreme, it's different. Right? I have BINA. I have a number of people here and overseas. Most of them are, when they're very young, are pretty wild, as I say, what we call Yiddish wilde chayes. Normal kids. And growing, they're getting there. There are amongst them, some of them that are a bit more extreme, and are who need intervention and getting it. That's fine. But not every kid, the thing is, right? Part of the problem is because we don't take responsibility. Now, this is a very important fundamental issue. Because there's a huge difference, and this is for adults as well, right? You know, we talked about the context of small A, big A, small D, and big D. Right? There's a very big difference. If I should actually turn it on. Right? There's a very big difference if your weakness comes from the animal soul, because this is the way you're born and you're a healthy human being, and all healthy human beings have weaknesses, or you've got a real disorder. Why is that so different? Because one of the most fundamental things in Judaism is bechira, free choice. Which means, free choice means that we make choices in our life, and we make choices to behave or not to behave, to worry or not to worry, to be frightened or not to be frightened. We make choices when we got a choice. In other words, gave us a choice, meaning He put before us good and bad. The Pasuk says in the Quran, He put before us life and death, good and bad, wrong and right, and He tells us we have to choose. Right? Now, that choice, the concept of Bechira, which is a hugely emphasized concept in Judaism, means that we have the ability to choose, but we also have the responsibility to choose. Not only the ability, the responsibility. Meaning it is up to us to work with ourselves, it's up to us to refine ourselves, up to us to learn about things, to explore values, it's up to us to look at those values, it's up to us to make a choice. In young kids, the responsibility of parents to do that. Parents are supposed to teach values, they're supposed to guide children, right? You know, there are things now, like for example, with normal things, I mean, talking about oppositional disorder, right? That's something that, I don't know if it's popular, but in America, you know, the summer camp thing, that's called summer anxiety. It's become a thing, like, you know, you go to camp, they're homesick. I mean, yeah, that's what happens. You can't be homesick. You go to your therapist, and the kid is severely homesick, right? I had a daughter that we had to send away a little bit young, doing very well, she's married with 3 kids. Thank God. She was very, very homesick for 2 weeks. I knew that would happen. We worked through it, supported it. And then the deadline, I said, we're still that way in a few weeks, we'll be home. And then recently I asked, you want to come home? No, absolutely not. Right? He's got through it. He get this right. Not every kid was getting with tackle that on has sensory processing problems, right? Not everything is a label, not everything needs to become pathology. Why? Because as parents, we have for ourselves, we have one responsibility. As parents, we have responsibility for children. To educate, right? To help them get through normal stuff. And when you make a sickness out of normal stuff, you run the risk of actually making it a lot worse. The unfortunate proof of this is the following. When you bring in awareness, when you get it right, it's supposed to make the situation better. In the physical for example, in 1928 when they discovered penicillin, the rate of death from infection dramatically dropped. Right? When they created awareness for breast cancer, for example, for women, the screening and all that, it greatly reduced the number of cases. Right? That's why we talk about this thing. That's why we think. So people have to go testing and all this kind of stuff. It hasn't happened, unfortunately, in the mental health field. The world's a mess. The rates of anxiety, depression, all these things have skyrocketed. Now, for a small introvert, you could say, well, the awareness, we now know what things are before we put it under the carpet, now we know what they are. That's true, it'll explain a little bit, a rate, doesn't explain it much, right? But that's a real issue. That's why we need to understand, again, mental health awareness is great, the interventions are great. We need to know what are the great ones, we need to know that not everything is a problem, and we need to engage in it and not over-pathologize, and go into it when it is necessary. In the most effective way possible. Because then we won't create new sickness, we'll just be dealing with the health crisis deep and problematic and extreme and necessary. Obviously, it is sometimes a bit nuanced because it's a little bit different to physical illness. So that is the challenge in the mental health field or the emotional field. But it is necessary to sort of start thinking about that and exploring that, especially with young children, but with adults. Right? Sometimes, even for ourselves, we need to know that something comes up. Not always is it a problem. It's something we could deal with on our own. The relevance of all this is this thing I said before. The relevance of all this is this: that part of what's going on, part of the failing of our society, lack of willingness to take responsibility. Right? We live in a victim society where we want something or someone to blame for everything that goes wrong. Right? We always talk about trauma. It's the same sort of thing, which is a real thing, by the way. It needs real attention. But sometimes we just need to take responsibility for ourselves. If we're feeling a bit anxious or worrying, we talked about this before. Very often it's just dose of bitachon, and learning about it can do the trick. Unless it's extreme, unless it causes dysfunction. But not always someone that talks to us, we feel sort of hurt. Do we need to say, I feel unsafe? I feel the buzzword that I feel unsafe. Just get yourself together and work it through. It's not, you're not sick, right? And so forth. And particularly not with the younger generation, particularly not with children, we need to create more problems than already. And we need to learn responsibility. And part of that is, she talks about a lot later in the book, is parents today don't want to parent. It's very hard. It's a hard generation to parent in. So it's easy to send off the therapist, to create a label, and just get it treated that way. But it doesn't work. If it's not necessary, it should actually be more harm than good. So that's just a bit of an introduction. We're going to go some specific areas next week. Very interesting ideas, very interesting concepts, where we'll see how it works and how to approach it in a good way and not in a damaging way. Okay. Therapy, Abigail, Shrier. S-A-I.
Thank you.
I know, not sure. But you can get any bookstore, you get it.